Good morning, everyone. I'll just be another 30 seconds or so. Okay, welcome everyone. We're going to continue on a little bit from our last session. I hope everyone's doing well today. We've got a number of people on the call. Just a little reminder, happy to hear from you. You don't have to use the chat. You can certainly just talk to me if you like. But if you are using the chat function, that's great. Please do, and I will certainly encourage that today, as well as just putting star 6 when you're not speaking, so that we can reduce the background noise. So we're going to talk a little bit more about strategy today. Strategy is something, again, people talk about the word all the time, but many people really don't understand what it means. And we talked last time a little bit more around, what it is, defining it, sort of thinking about how much we're doing it. We started talking about strategic thinking versus strategic acting, but we're going to finish that today, obviously, in the second part. A little bit on what stops us and the biases that play into strategy. And also just a little piece on the end, because we talked about it when we talked about influence and persuasion. However, strategic relationships, just a little sort of reminder and how that ties in as well. So in terms of strategic thinking, we had this last time. I'm just going to bring it up again very quickly. So strategic thinking is around looking at everything, looking at the total enterprise and beyond, looking at trends, understanding your competition, seeing where the business needs to go, and looking forward. Okay, there's an element to the past for sure, but there's a lot around looking forward into the future, and what could be in the future. What are the possible choices that we can make that can lead towards an exciting future for our organization? Then we talked briefly, I'm not going to go into it again, but just around what's the strategic plan. So you've got a plan that achieves goals. Is it really something that's a binder stuck up on your shelf with dust on it, which often is what I hear. Yeah, we've got a plan somewhere. It's something that has to be linked to everything that we do. So whether it's performance objectives and how they're tied into those higher level strategic goals, how everything's linked, helping create sort of those goalposts around making choices. So if we have these really cool opportunities that comes up out in the environment somewhere, whether it's something that's different from our competitor or whatever it might be, helping us think about, okay, if we're really thinking about our strategy, does it align, right? Not every shiny object is something you want to tackle or you have the time and the resources to tackle. Having said that, maybe it's a time to shift. Every single strategic plan is a fluid document. It's going to change, it's going to evolve. So maybe something that's shiny object turns into some really amazing opportunity that you put a lot of your resources into. And again, time and money are the ones that we obviously think of. And time for us, but time for our colleagues. Something's going to have to give in most organizations. They don't have surplus people, surplus time. So what's going to change, what's going to shift? So it's really a plan around that, kind of creating those goalposts. And then if we're thinking strategically, then we can capture those opportunities, okay? Now, in terms of, I'm not going to go through all these in detail, but when you think about strategic thinking, when you talk about strategic thinking, it's really around multiple components. So keeping your eye on the ball. What's the big picture? Where we need to go? What's our focus? Keeping in the guideposts. How to be analytical around that. Seeing systems. So in other words, seeing outside the organization, seeing how that relates. Maybe the economy, like what are things that are happening in relationships out there that actually connect to what we do? Are we keeping on top of things in the world? Do we know what opportunities arise? Are we ahead of the game, ahead of the curve? Are we looking at it from a past perspective, present and future perspective? And is it looking long-term enough? Is it all around, our Q4 results or our Q1 results? Or is it really thinking, yeah, that's fine. Is that where we need to be to hit our long-term goals? In terms of risk, you guys live in that world, anticipating and mitigating risk, and questioning assumptions and habits and conclusions that we come up with, which often hold us back, which we'll talk about in a few minutes. And allowing for intelligent opportunism. So that really comes, really taps into really understanding that this is a constant thing. This is something we have to focus on. Intelligent opportunism sort of looks at the opportunities that arise, and you understand the world, it's dynamic, and we have to take advantage of things. And also understanding our organization, hearing from different perspectives. Are we actually taking intelligent decisions, intelligent actions, which we'll talk about shortly, to actually take advantage of things that come up? Sounds a little conceptual, I know. We'll get into a little more tangibles as well. So overall, strategic thinkers, they anticipate. So think about somebody that you know, and they're always thinking around something. They're noticing something in the environment, or they're noticing a relationship, or something within your organization, as an example, that isn't working properly. Are they seeing patterns? Are they noticing things that processes, procedures? Are they seeing how things tie together? That is strategic thinking. Are they thinking creatively and critically? So we can be, you know, we talk all about being positive, but sometimes we have to be critical. Are we actually doing the same thing that we did last year for the right reasons? Are we really questioning how we're looking at something, right? Should we blow something up to kind of create something new? A little extreme, but how can you look at it a little differently? Looking at the data and interpreting the data and aligning it to what you need to do. I think one of the biggest things is trade-offs. So thinking is one thing. One thing I notice, and I can say I've done it myself, is it's all about, I'm a personality type where it's all about possibilities and coming up with really cool creative things. So sometimes you can get stuck in that space and you can have paralysis by analysis. So it's really around, oh, we could do this and we could do this and we could do this. Other people are more grounded and they don't want to see all those changes and they just want to start implementing. So the people that are up in the clouds and coming up with the possibilities, at the end of the day, you got to decide, right? Something has to be done and a decision has to be made. The people that are the opposite, who are all about, let's just implement something, are they taking the time to really think about possibilities? Are you taking a step back to sort of say, I mean, how many times do you guys in the span of a quarter, out of 4 quarters in the year, actually stop and say, what are we doing? Why are we doing it? What could we do differently? Are there any opportunities out there that we can take advantage of? Are there any risks out there that we talked about in the last session? A risk, if you've got something out there that's a challenge, it could become an opportunity. But if you don't take advantage of an opportunity, someone else may. So it actually might turn into a threat, right? So, and learning, it's a constant process of evolution. One of the things that holds us back as well is, you know, well, oh, I don't want to make a mistake. Let's just do status quo. No organization that's ever succeeded in the world has ever done it by doing status quo. So what are some educated risks you can do? If you actually have people that think strategically and you take the time to do it and measure your results, that's learning. So that's a whole process of learning. So I want someone to tell me what they think this means. If all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. What do you think that means? What do you think? I know I've got my chat functioning working, so someone send me a note there, or let me know if my chat isn't working. What do you think that means or could mean? Yes. So if you've got the same old thing, that hammer in your hand, and you've had that hammer in your hand for a while, boy, it makes it really obvious how everything else around you becomes a nail. It's absolutely that. Thank you for that, Don. It's something that we have so many biases when it comes to strategy that we really never do become completely creative. right, in terms of looking at possibilities. So what really gets in the way? So when you think about it, before I put the next little image up there, what's the one thing that you can think about that holds you back from doing strategy? There's one thing that stands above all, not that that has to be it, but what's the one thing you find that keeps you from talking or thinking about strategy? Yes, that's a good one. Fear of being wrong. It's a good one, actually. A lot of people do have that fear. And time, thank you, Debbie. That tends to be, fear of being wrong is actually a really big one, but time is absolutely the top one for sure. A lot of people say, you know, I'm so caught in the doing, I don't have the time to think about it. I've got the client to get back to, I've got that report that's got to be written. But when you think about it, what is more significant? Sorry, my headset's dying here. I'm just going to have to switch it out just a second. Okay, I'm just on my phone there, so if anybody can't hear me, you can let me know in the chat. Get that headset going again. Talking too much, you can only imagine. With time actually, there was a study done in by Rotman School of Management, and they had 67% of managers believed that their organization was bad at actually strategy. But the number one thing that came out in terms of the research was that 85% of executives spend less time than an hour a month discussing strategy, and 50% spend no time at all. So how in the world are you supposed to be able to do this if you can't have the time to do it? So what's the risk of not doing it? You guys are risk mitigators. Think about it now. What is the actual risk of not doing it? There are so many opportunities out there. You're in a very competitive industry. Things are changing all the time. There's a regulation component. There's so many things. So when if something passes you by, what an opportunity lost, right? Whether it's new clients, whether it's new way of doing business, maybe it's how you're viewed by your client base, right? So whatever it is, what are you not doing that you need to take advantage of? And it's so easy to get caught in front of the shiny object or the squeaky wheel, which often happens as well. So time absolutely is number one. And commitment and lack of priorities actually comes in number two. So here are some things that I hear, you know, a lot. So killer phrases. So when you're in a strategy meeting and somebody says things like, it'll cost too much. We don't have the time. Why change it? It's working okay. Let's form a committee to discuss it further, which might be 6 months down the road. You just don't understand. So some of the key things that you hear there, yeah, you think, oh, it's just negative. No, I mean, there's valid points in everything that's being said there. But you got to really go dig into that and start helping people see things a little bit differently. We have struggles with change, a lot of us do, and we can't handle, you know, taking a risk on something. Maybe there is a financial commitment. Maybe you've got to hire someone new to help with a new initiative. That's a big investment, right? That hits your bottom line. So how do you actually start thinking about that? As, yeah, understood, absolutely, it could cost too much, but let's talk about that. Let's talk about the possibilities. Let's talk about, okay, if we do it right, what's the opportunity? Okay, so if we have that opportunity, how do we mitigate the risk? So what can we do? Maybe there's some things you can do for change adverse folks, right? Maybe you can take one step closer. Maybe you can work with them with your influence and persuasion to help them understand and really understand what's going on with them to make them a little bit more negative in terms of an opportunity. So again, not saying these aren't valid. I mean, we've all said them. We've all said them. I don't care who you are. As strategic as I am, as an example, I've absolutely used some of these. So how do you get past them? Really just inquiry, discussion, talking it through. You know, if you've got someone who's really change adverse, helping bring them into the equation, and we've done stuff on change before, and we've talked about this, but that's just one thing that you have to really keep in mind. The immediate versus the long term. So overemphasizing the immediate. Again, we talked about it, that place is a shiny object in front of you. So there's other biases I'm just going to run through pretty quickly. So anchoring. So oftentimes when we're making a decision, we tend to give our initial impression more weight. Okay, so if we have a sense of, oh, maybe we should go this way, we tend to anchor everything around that. So that just means that we start thinking about that as almost a goalpost, right? So whereas is that real, right? We have these assumptions and understandings and beliefs. Sometimes we have to question them to really get to the next level. Confirming, again, I know this is right. And every time I turn around, I'm going to notice something that confirms that I'm right. We will, again, have a hammer in our hand and we will find nails. So we will say, this is the right approach and here's why. And we will do anything possible to prove ourselves right. It's human nature. Don't feel guilty about it. It's just who we are as people. Groupthink. Oftentimes organizations, if you've been together a long time, do you start thinking alike? Absolutely. Right? Interjecting new ideas and perspectives into your team. Is everyone saying yes to things? Are you in meetings where people are saying yes? Or are you a leader where people are afraid to say no? You know, where is that the natural ability to create a little bit of dialogue around something? Someone bringing up an idea that might be against yours as a leader, right? That's one thing that will never have creativity. You'll never have new ideas and an engaging environment. So groupthink, again, over time, if you've been together a long time, it naturally happens. Oh, we've all been through this one. So say you've got a computer system and you've invested in the computer system and you're like, okay, well, it doesn't give us all our needs and it won't do this strategically and it won't do that, but we've already spent X number of dollars on it. So it's sunk cost, right? We can't change our minds. But again, how do you step back and say, okay, if we don't, what's the risk? If we do, what's the risk? Right? Really thinking about it. And we do that one a lot because we're obviously in organizations that are profit driven, right? It's how we stay in business. So situational analysis differs. So how you see something is different, you know, than my perspective, right? So bashing around, you know, if something new comes up or a new opportunity, or is it a threat? Who sees it which way? How do you actually start talking about apples to apples? And of course, regular personal biases. It could be our own personal fear of change, fear of putting something forward. That gets in the way of strategic thinking. I'm not going to go through a lot of these here. You can do a quick scan there yourself on the slide. Some obviously thinking about flexibility, huge. Focus on the future, positive outlook. One of the biggest ones there, sort of are near the bottom. Sorry, I cut off the bottom guy there. I thought he was cute, but I forgot my strategic thinkers. Apologies on the slide. Openness and curiosity. So we have our own biases. Someone puts out an idea, you think it's completely asinine. Don't. Just take a step back and make sure you really understand it. Some people are actually very forward thinking. Some people who are very high level strategic thinkers and creative thinkers will come up with something that maybe you don't understand. So maybe explore it before you just shut it down. Be open to it, be curious about it, because maybe it doesn't have merit in the way you're thinking about it, but maybe there's something to it. So if you have someone bringing up an idea or a perception or a concept, especially if you're in a strategic discussion, ask them to walk it through. I'm a very high level strategic thinker. I can get lost in the clouds, absolutely. I'm not necessarily the person that's sitting down doing the spreadsheet, although I can. But for sometimes I will come up with something, as an example, many years ago, getting feedback around, Heather, you're too fast. And I assumed this is in Ontario, typical Newfoundlanders speaking too quickly, which we often do, and I apologize if I'm doing it today. But what they actually meant was I was speaking so quickly in terms of my thoughts, so I actually wasn't taking my time. If you've ever had this problem, step back, talk about it one step at a time. We all process information differently. If you have someone who's a very analytical person, they will need a step-by-step of how you got to where you were thinking. If you've ever had something that you thought was obvious shut down, or if you've had something you brought up and then 3 months later someone else brought it up and they thought it was fabulous, sometimes everyone processes information differently. Some people need pictures, some people need a descriptor. A lot of people, especially in technical worlds, really need a step-by-step description of what you're thinking about. So when I think about this and I think about that, you know, what comes to mind is this. And because of that, here's the approach I'm thinking we could take versus just talking about the approach you think you should take. Okay, so just if anyone's there on either side of that spectrum, please consider it. A couple of quick things. Again, I won't go into this in detail, but when you talk about time, if time is the biggest thing that stops us, okay, when we think about delegation, we think about what we actually have on our plate, the shiny objects that are our client who's calling, maybe for the 10th time today. What are some things we have to look at? So if you think about all the activities you do in a day, okay, so what are you actually going to delete? How many times have you been in a meeting thinking, I really don't need to be here? Are you and your direct report in the same meeting? Do you need to be? Are there things that you can actually delete out of your week. Think about that now. If you could have 1 or 2 hours extra a week, what you could accomplish from a strategic standpoint, okay? Is there something you can delay? Is the shiny object, do you really have to get back to that client who's already called 3 or 4 times today if it's 3 o'clock in the afternoon? Could you call them in the morning? I don't know. I'm just putting it out there. Can you delay something that's not a priority? And what is the shiny object? Sometimes they're just things we like to do. So what can you diminish? So in other words, what is it I'm doing I don't need to do as much of? Can I drop it back a little bit? Can I actually not, do I need to do that full report? Have we actually talked, you know, is there things on my desk that I don't need to do all of? Or why are we doing that report again? You know, things, look at what you're doing and really understand if they're valid and if they're strategic and they're really going to help you move forward with your clients or with your employees or whatever it might be. And again, how do you delegate? So distribute things around. Are you the only person that can do it? Is it best for you to do it, or is it better for you to start thinking more strategically? You're having a minute to just think, okay? So in terms of acting, we'll talk about the last few minutes now on acting, and we'll zip through as much as we can. Acting is only so good. If you're thinking, it's kind of irrelevant if you're not actually showing it. I've had people who are highly strategic who just don't act strategically, and they actually don't elevate in the organization, and they're not looked at as a strategic thinker, even though they are. So I want you to think of a good strategic person. So colleague, leader, could be volunteer. Just tell me 1 or 2 things that you see that makes them in your mind strategic. So just give me a couple if you can. What's something someone you would know they're strategic if they're doing? Looking for input, absolutely. So you've got someone who's, you know, asking questions, looking for input. How can we do something differently? Evaluating. It could be someone who's talking about something they heard in the news. Absolutely, that's strategic thinking. Is it looking at your financials and thinking about, you know, I know we do this, we spend money on this. Is that the right use of our money? Is there something more strategic we should spend it on? There's so many things that could make people look strategic. And, you know, whether you agree with it or not, it's worth acknowledging and saying, you know, that makes sense that you're thinking about that. Let's talk about it, right? You don't have to agree with everything someone says. This is just a little sort of skills assessment. So just a couple things, I'll run through it quickly for you to think about. So if you actually ranked yourself 1 to 5. So again, for time, I'm going to go through quite quickly, but I want you to think about ones where you are going to rate yourself or you would rate yourself low. So when there's something uncertain and ambiguous, something you're not sure about, can you be decisive? So are you someone who can actually say, we have to make a decision, we can't just sit and wait, we need to move forward in one way, shape, or form, okay? You manage the tension created by your daily successes and your longer term successes. So in other words, you understand, you talk about your daily, you talk about your weekly, what did you do that quarter, but recognizing the longer term components, really bringing those into play. How does it, fine, we did this in Q1, how does it tie into our strategy in the longer term? You know, you got that client to do this, or you got that client to do that, here's how that applies to our strategy, here's how we're changing how we're looking at our clients, and that's why it's good. So that's number 2. Number 3, you're engaged in tactics that are aligned and consistent with your strategy. Do you constantly talk about your strategy? Is it something that makes sense? Like, are you actually bringing it up? Is it something that just the senior folks talk about? Well, it shouldn't be. Everyone should be talking about the strategy, the high components anyway, not all the detail. They're aligned, so your decisions are absolutely aligned. The guideposts are there, and you're creating your decisions around that. And you're actually saying no to things as well. You provide the right balance between oversight and autonomy regarding actions. So are you actually getting involved too much? Are you overseeing things? Are you letting people do their jobs? So you can think strategically. Some people can think more strategically, okay? You recognize and reward appropriate risk-taking and entrepreneurial creativity. So is there an interesting thing that you've delegated to someone and they do something a little differently? Is there a group that's tried something new And do you look at that and say, well, you're not falling in line? Or do you actually, if they had the autonomy to execute something, but they executed it in their own way, did it work, right? And not to, even if it didn't work perfectly, can you look at it that way? You're ready to adapt existing plans to changing conditions. Are you moving? Are you adapting? Something happened. Is it sort of a, oh my God, just keep going the way we are? Or do you actually sit back and say, how does this affect us? What makes sense here? Say you brought in a change and it didn't work. Are you going to actually stand there and say, okay, let's just keep going? Or do you actually sit back and say, what do we need to do here differently? So having that constant evolution, that change. Gain insight in your own actions by intentionally reflecting on the consequences they produce. So again, evaluating. That's just evaluating. Are you evaluating as you go along? And you examine your mistakes and the mistakes of others in order to learn. We've talked about that before in terms of engagement. Do we look at failures as an opportunity to learn and grow? So those are ways that are fundamental to be acting strategically, not just thinking that way. Again, for time, just going to run through some of these quickly. So self-awareness, I think one of the biggest things is looking at yourself. As I've talked to you guys about this before, the only person you can really control is yourself. So if that's the case, I can control what I'm thinking, I can control what I'm doing. So really understanding who you are, what you're saying, and how you're acting, and being very conscious about that. And as someone mentioned earlier about looking for input, questioning yourself and others, asking questions, looking for input, looking for mentorship and feedback. Looking at decisions with strategy and be decisive, as we talked about before, and just skipping down a few, prioritizing. This is another piece. Oftentimes when I say to people, so I want you to write down, what you guys are focused on this week or this month, so as a team. And they write down what they're doing and whatever, and how much of it is actually aligned to your core strategic objectives for the next 2 years. And oftentimes less than half, sometimes it's less than a quarter, is actually aligned with that. So you sort of have to think about that. So if the way we're going to move forward and grow and evolve and be an organization that's profitable, sustainable, engaging, all those pieces, how is that falling to the wayside? How does that actually play into everything we're doing every day? So prioritization is really important, and it actually gives you the tools. Here's what we're prioritizing on. And if you've got your marching orders for that year and you're told, okay, here are the 4 key objectives that you have for this year with your team to meet these strategic goals. And then your boss comes to you and says, well, actually, you got to do this year. You also have to do this. Then you've got to reset those because you can't do it all, right? So fair enough. So if your boss's name is Mary, that's great. But if I've got these 4 strategic objectives and you add on 2 more, I don't know if I can get those all done. I mean, how can you help me prioritize these? Because I think 4 is going to be more than enough for me. So those are just a couple of key things there. So how do you get better at strategy? Trial and error. Doesn't sound much fun, does it? There is no sort of school where you can go to and say, this is how you be strategic. You can learn about it, like on the session like this, so that you can be more thoughtful about it. But trial and error, trying something out, maybe asking a question that's different than you've ever asked before. Maybe it's trying to prioritize a little differently. Whatever it is, you got to try it out and see how it fits. And not just yourself, you and your team. How can we be more focused on our goals? What do your meetings look like? Can you change those? Trial and error, there will be errors. You'll get a little off track, you'll have those biases kick in, and you'll miss an opportunity or whatever it is, but that's the best way to learn. There's other areas, obviously, you can learn from as well. But just to let you know, that's the number 1. So we'll execute our strategy in the usual way. The powerful will delegate to the untalented until failure is achieved. How long will that take? We just finished. So people execute strategy in different ways. And it has to be thoughtful, it has to be impactful, and everyone in the organization needs to know what it means. One of the big things with strategy, if you think about it from a team perspective, is helping people understand what they do, the impact that it has on the organization. And one of the easiest low-hanging fruits to do that is to actually talk to them about how their job impacts the organization, how it impacts the team, how it helps drive, if you're client-focused, which most of you are, how it helps the client, right? What does it mean? So understanding that is really, really pivotal. So you're in those meetings. Say you're going to interject a few minutes in your monthly meeting or whatever it might be, say 30 minutes, we're going to talk about our strategy, where we are, maybe reassess our strategies. Is there anything new in the environment? How are we doing with what we have? What's falling off the rails? How can we better support that? What's stopping us? Are we getting caught up in things that we shouldn't be caught up in? So with a couple of just a quick, we talked before around questions, and it's one of the top skills I think as a leader is being open and curious and asking questions and listening. And you've heard me say that many times. So asking why, I mentioned before when we did coaching and things, why and closed questions is not going to actually help us work. So if you actually look at the neuroscience, doing a lot of reading on neuroscience lately and how it actually helps. So if you're asking those closed-ended questions, it's not actually stimulating the whole brain, but asking an open-ended question. So what's one thing right now that we're doing that is not meeting our strategic objectives? What's one strategic objective that doesn't seem right considering our current environment? Now that's a little sort of an odd question, but you know, however you'd frame that in your own words, to your team. What is it we need to be doing more of right now? What are we not going to hit this year? How can we do a better job so that we can? So those questions, that's what gets the creativity going. That's what gets the other side of the brain kicking in your team and yourself, right? So from a learning perspective, in those meetings, make sure you ask those how, what, and when scenario questions, right, to get things rolling. Okay, in terms of, these are just some sample ones just to give you guys an idea of some questions or things that you can start thinking about. So how might this connect to whatever so-and-so is doing or our business line? How might this, what I'm doing right now, or this decision connect with this? How might whatever happened in the environment connect with what we're doing? How could that affect our client? Connect with what that client is doing? And what outcomes are we trying to achieve? So what are we actually doing? These are very simple strategic questions you should be asking yourself all the time. If you're looking at your environment internally and externally, impact, what impact is this going to have on, right? If we choose, here's another one I find really challenging for folks. When you're trying to choose between X over Y, so this approach versus this approach, right? What are the implications? Doing pros and cons. Walking through, what if we do this one? What does that mean? Well, that's exciting. That's really cool, but we can't do it because of this. Well, hold on now. Let's say, what if we could do it? How do we actually make that happen, right? Making it a possibility. So what's the strategic priority? What might you to say no to, right? So you can't do it all. So how do you actually, you know, pick one over another? Might be very different. Again, I'm not going to go through all these. You can read some if you like, if anyone stand out. I highlighted a few, you know, key threats and opportunities. One I really like, which I use with clients all the time, sometimes when I'm coaching, is assume, they'll say, oh, we can't afford to do it. Okay, let's assume there's no budget. Sky's the limit. What would you do and why? And then they talk about, oh, we could do this, and we could do this, and we could this. And then you sort of say something like, you know, what does that tell you, or what does that mean? So if we would do this for our clients, maybe you can't do all that, but what does it say to you? Does it say that, yeah, we should be doing more in this area? Does it say, yeah, maybe our focus could be, or maybe there's a piece of that we can do? You know, so you look at the sky and then work your way backwards in terms of what you might actually be able to accomplish. It kind of opens people's minds up to it. And all those biases sort of get thrown out the window. And again, how does whatever we're doing align with the vision? A couple more. How do I create time to think more strategically? That would be the one thing right now I'm going to say to you guys. If nothing else from this session, if you have a sense of, yeah, we're not doing enough, and no matter where you start, it may not be perfect, but how do you create the time to think more strategically, yourself and your teams? How can you make it work? How do you, sitting there in your office and thinking is actually extremely productive. And some organizations actually mandate that happens, okay? Looking busy and being active on a keyboard or on the phone isn't always necessarily the best thing you should be doing. Okay, so in terms of relationships, so just in the last few minutes, I'm just gonna delve into this a tiny bit. We talked before about relationships. So, and I've been talking at you a bit now. Can you think of anything? It's a little bit of an odd question, but I just thought I'd throw it out there. What makes a relationship strategic? So you have only so much time. And if you're going to go out and create or nurture relationships, they should be strategic. But what makes a relationship strategic? Can you think of something that will come to mind for you? What makes a relationship strategic? What do you think? Throw me a bone. Common goals. Excellent. Thanks, Andy. Appreciate it. That's absolutely right. So, and this actually ties right into my first comment. So mutually beneficial, right? You've got both parties aligned with the goals, so you're aligned, it's mutually beneficial, working together with everyone's ideas. Excellent, thanks, Don. So working together, and are they willing to be working with you, right? It's purposeful, it's targeted, you know, there's an outcome in mind, right? And I've heard people say who, you know, aren't as great at networking and things or connecting with folks that it sounds manipulative. It's really not. If both parties are actually going to get something from that. So there's other, you know, types of consultants out there and coaches out there that I network with all the time. And I even had a client who needed something that I couldn't give them. So actually one of my key competitors who we go out for lunch every once in a while, you know, a little bit different in my world. But yeah, I absolutely forwarded that client onto that person and they're thrilled. And so I still keep my clients and they get a little extra. So it's a very strategic relationship for me. Not always in your world, but it is in mine. So that's sort of what makes it. So how do you actually build those relationships? So we talked before, so we're going to just do a quick recap, but tie it into strategy. So we had 3 kinds of networks before. We talked about, you know, your operational, what you do in the span of your day, the career, and the future focused. So when you actually look at building a network, as I said before, I'll just pop this up super fast. How do you get to know people? What makes sense? Strategically, you don't know what's going to be going on. You don't know you're going to need for what. Right? Understanding that, yeah, that connection can open things up. Maybe it's a weak tie, but they connect me to other people. Maybe they know everybody out there and they can connect me or they give me. For example, I was talking to a client yesterday and we were talking about some work and I said, you know, I know someone in that organization. I'm going to call them and ask their opinion. And she was thrilled. She's like, oh my gosh, that's great. If we could get that perspective, it would be really helpful. So, you know, it's like your Rolodex, if anybody's old enough to know what a Rolodex is. You know, who's in your Rolodex? That makes sense strategically. You know, if, for example, something changes in the economy, do you have enough in your network or people you know internally in your internal network who can make a phone call to find out? If it's a regulatory change, do you have the right connections? And that's in the governmental space as an example. So when you're working with those folks, what do you actually do? So how do you actually build it? So some things you can think about, questions to help build them and to sort of prep yourself too, right? So you just don't go and chatter about things. I mean, yeah, you will. You'll, you know, have that person, you'll say, how you doing? You haven't talked to you for a while, you know, but also having a plan of what do I need to speak to this person about? When's the last time I talked to this person? What was going on in their world? Right? Creating that trust and that relationship is, oh my gosh, yeah, how did that change go over there? How did, you know, I knew you were going through this, or how are the kids, or something to connect you to them. And then understanding their environment, right? So we had some things happen here in Newfoundland, and I immediately got on to one of my connections for a VP of Human Resources, and I emailed her and said, oh my gosh, you know, you don't have to respond, but just thinking about you, I can only imagine what you're going through right now with all those changes. So, you know, keep it up and we'll grab lunch sometime. We can chat about it. So just a little note I sent out. Again, when things settle down, you know, you go out for coffee and you have a chat, solidifying that relationship. She would do the same thing for me. So what's going on in their world? How can they be connected? If that was something connected to me, but I know what she was going through is connected to some of my other clients, it's absolutely, so when I got more information, it helped me, right, with my other clients to understand what's happening. If you've got, like, say, if you work in the construction industry and you know someone who works not necessarily a client, but maybe it's a construction association or someone else, where's your network that can help you understand and help them, but also help yourself and your organization? So, building, when you just look at sphere of influence, number 3 there, building a broad network, asking the questions, listening at multiple levels. So what's happening at the top, what's happening at the middle. And one of the big things I think that gets lost in strategy sometimes, especially thinkers over actors, you have to communicate a point of view. As a leader, and I'm sure most of you are leaders or soon to be leaders, you have to communicate a point of view. May not be exactly everyone's point of view. Make sure you're thoughtful in how you bring up your point of view. Don't be offended if not everybody connects with your point of view, but bringing one up and putting something on the table absolutely connects with others, okay? Creates strategic relationships internally and externally. So even when I'm with some very strong-minded clients of mine, I absolutely put my point of view out there. Not strongly, just sort of throw it out on the table just for consideration and conversation, right? It's very important. So strategy is one of those things that's tough. So I know we've got a couple minutes left there. I want you to think about, because this is the one I find that gets lost the most. It's the one that's the most pivotal, and we've known for decades how important strategy is, but it doesn't seem to get woven into everything we do every day, how we think and all those things. So I want you to put in the chat box, think for a minute and put in the chat box something that you're going to do differently with regard to strategy. And I think this is the one where if you could go back, I'm putting a request out. Next meeting you have, if it's a senior leadership meeting, if it's a team meeting, whatever it might be, ask the question. So let's talk strategy. How connected are we to strategy? Do you guys understand what you're doing and how it connects to the strategy? Here are our 3 major strategic things for the organization for this year. How do we tie into this? And if they don't know, they should know and walk through that. What are some things do you think we also need to be focusing on? Are we missing anything? What we're focusing on right now can change. So what could we do differently? So if you could go out to even take 10 minutes and just do a touch point to see where everything is, like a temperature check, a strategic temperature check, and see where everybody's heads are. Do we have enough? What do we need to do more of? Do we talk about it enough? So just think about that. And also just write something in the chat if you're willing to take up that challenge, or if there's anything else that you think would be helpful for you. If you could pop that in and let me know what you thought of the session, that would be excellent. Our next session is going to be on role of a leader, which is essential, I find. And if you've got people who are leaders, it's fabulous. If you've got people who may be leaders down the road, definitely one to check out. It's something very basic. I work at all levels of organizations, leaders with. This is something we can always chat about. So pop it in the chat, and I thank you all very much, and I'll stay on in case there's any questions.